Sly 2. What can I really say? Some people love this game for the presentation and story, while others hate it or think it's worse than the original because of the aspect of playing as other characters. As for me, well, I would probably say that Sly 2 is generally the better game over Sly 1. However, that's not the full story. So I'll try my best to explain the sort of gray area that I kind of fall into with this game. The game opens with Sly and the gang trying to steal back the clockwork parts. When they finally reach the area where the clockwork parts are supposedly held, they run into Carmelita Fox and Constable Neela. Constable Neela informs Carmelita Fox and Sly that the Claw Gang were most likely the real perpetrators in stealing the clockwork parts, and the plot starts to become Sly, Bentley, and Murray going across the world to recover each of the different clockwork parts from the Claw Gang. Overall, this starts out as a by-the-books plot, but eventually twists and turns as you continue through the game. I like how each member of the Claw Gang works together as a collective unit instead of individually like the Fiendish Five. Already, this establishes them as more threatening villains. When I say as a collective unit, I mean how each of the members of the Claw Gang are working towards a common goal of shipping out and manufacturing spice. It really made the Claw Gang feel that much like a fully realized threat, unlike how the Fiendish Five all separate and did their own thing. With the development of the villains also comes the development of the protagonists, and Sly, Bentley, and Murray feel like a much more closely knit gang. Before, it kind of felt like Sly looked down upon Bentley and Murray, but in Sly 2, is a much fonder appreciation, especially after Bentley saves both him and Murray from the Contessa. Furthermore, each of the members have grown up from their previous roles, such as Bentley now being the demolitions expert and Murray now being the Murray. One thing I like with how the Claw Gang presented themselves to the Cooper Gang is that the latter constantly wanted to relax at the end of every heist and make this like an adventure from the first game. However, because the Claw Gang is constantly proving to be a more potent threat, the Gang realizes they have to constantly stay on their feet and that there was no going back to the old days. Therefore, these mini-vacations are fewer and far between. Sly, Bentley, and Murray hanging out are some of my favorite scenes. However, the Claw Gang feels like a looming threat waiting to demolish them. In fact, this is especially seen when John Bisson sells all the clockwork parts to Arpeggio, ruining all the Cooper Gang's work. It really puts the gang in a bind and forces them to reevaluate what they were up against. The general presentation of Sly 2 is overall solid and better than the first. The game runs at 60 frames per second, although there are areas where the game really slows down and there's some weird blur effects. The visuals look a lot sharper compared to what we got in the Thievius Raccoonus. Now during the in-engine cutscene, some of the characters sport a facial expression that seems to display their sense of personality. For instance, Sly's face makes me think of someone that is devious and mischievous at the same time. I mean, look at that smarmy face. So much better compared to the lip-flapping we got in the Thievius Raccoonus. The music also sets its own form of atmosphere in the game. In order to have a more stealthy feel, the music will be reduced to basic strumming and barely audible music when you are sneaking around. However, the OST becomes more frantic when the guards start to give chase. The voice acting also made a major improvement in Sly 2. Sly no longer sounds like he's whispering his lines, and Kevin Miller brings about a more brash and confident personality within him. On the other hand, Chris Murphy as Murray makes a huge improvement in the sense that Murray now sounds much more confident and stronger compared to the nervous train wreck that he was in Sly 1. Well, he wasn't necessarily a train wreck. It was more a cutesy kind of hippo who was kind of just there. Now, in order to reflect Murray's character development, he does sound like a stronger brute compared to before. However, he is a brute with a heart of gold. So, don't get too mad at me for ignoring the subtlety.
Greetings, citizen. I hope you weren't harmed by my meteoropic entrance.
However, that's enough gushing about the presentation of Sly 2. It is now time for me to go into the more controversial aspect, which is the gameplay. Sly 2 isn't quite the sequel as like Jak 2, which was a complete overhaul, and Ratchet & Clank 2, which was an expansion of the original. Sly 2 was more somewhere in the middle. One of the first things that the game throws you into is a large open world that allows for more exploration. Structurally, this is very similar to GTA because it has you completing missions while exploring. However, unlike other sandbox games, Sly 2 lacks side quests. Replacing these side quests are the return of the clue bottles and items that can increase the amount of coins for ThiefNet. I like the ones where you have to carry the item back to the safe house because it really challenges me to know the map and makes use of the waypoint system. On the other hand, the clue bottles are a lot harder to find since they are scattered all around the open world. You really have to listen to the clinking sound of the bottles in order to get them. If you are trying to achieve 100% in Sly 2, I'm sorry to say that you will struggle a lot with finding all the clue bottles. This is especially the case with the dense and open-ended levels, like the jungle and The Predator Awakens. There are so many different areas in this level that it is very difficult to find all the clue bottles, and at the end of the day, it is incredibly time-consuming. The other characters, Bentley and Murray, are now the Murray, can be an absolute pain to navigate around. Well, I will say that navigation waypoints provide an easy enough point for Bentley and the Murray to reach, but if you're trying to deliver clue bottles with these guys, then Sly is really your safest bet. Bentley uses sleep darts and bombs to dispose his enemies, while Murray uses brute strength. Personally, I found the Murray's levels to be a bit easier to navigate around, if only because he could just brute force through most of the enemies, whereas Bentley was more methodical. You can also buy new abilities for these characters through ThiefNet. And initially I had a section talking about how I thought these power-ups were useless, but actually I found myself using some of Murray and Bentley's abilities in the game, and some of them made the traversal a lot easier. However, it didn't make it easier by a lot, so I still feel some of the special powers are unnecessary. And then there are the vehicle sections of the game. Most of them tend to be on-rail shooters. Sometimes you have the opportunity to control an RC copter. Most of these control awkwardly, especially the RC chopper trying to make all those tight turns to dodge missiles. Quite honestly, these missions are as good as you imagine them to be. I kind of wonder why Sucker Punch placed them in the game in the first place. And then there are the missions within Sly 2. A lot of the missions fit well with the different characters' gameplay styles. Most of the missions for Sly involve performing acrobatics and sneaking around. A personal favorite is when Sly needs to pose as a statue in order to take out guards. On the other hand, Bentley's missions involve hacking computers and setting traps. These hacking missions are pretty simple, all things considered. They mainly involve going in and activating switches while shooting other enemies in the way. Murray's missions mostly involve you trying to punch enemies. Brute strength is his main forte. This is why I like Murray's missions. They are a great break from the stealth gameplay of Sly and Bentley. In fact, it would have been nice if you could only play as them in their enclosed missions, considering they are limited when you control them in the open world. Well, a certain third game does this. That is for another review. So yeah, for the most part, the gameplay is a hit or a miss. So I guess Sly 2 has most of it going for it in the story. In the ending of the game, I will say that I do like how everything seems to tie together in a bow.
So, what? You had Neela put me on the scent back in Cairo, and then waited while I stole the parts from the other Claw Gang members, all the while not arousing any suspicion that you were behind it all?
You make it sound easy, Cooper. I had to carry your pathetic gang through that first set of heists. I was overjoyed when Arpeggio let me toss you in jail. I could finally go after the parts myself.
However, I will say that the emergence of Claw made me somewhat sick to the stomach, considering that it almost felt like Sucker Punch wasn't creative enough to create a brand new villain in Neela to the fullest potential. Instead, they had to reuse another incarnation of Clockwork. So the game ends in a rail shooter section, and I just wanted it to end so badly. I mean, just look at how slowly that health bar of Clockla is draining. This boss almost felt like it took ages to defeat. Finally, I was able to do it, and then I leaped across several platforms, and finally, Bentley removed the hate chip, and that was that. Sly 2 was over. However, all that being said about the final boss, I will say that I quite enjoyed the ending of Sly 2, and it kind of made up for all the problems and issues that Sly 2 had. Like I said before, one of the best parts about Sly 2 was the relationship between Bentley, and Murray, and Sly. And it just all seemingly came together in the end of Sly 2. I felt like these three characters had come such a long way by the end of the game, especially Bentley, considering that he had to free the gang at one point. However, just to see this guy get injured at the end of Sly 2 almost brought a single tear down my eye, considering everything that he's gone through, and also everything that the entire gang has gone through, that it almost feels like a bit of a tragedy. Even the character of Carmelita Fox I felt like was more fleshed out compared to the original game. I also felt like there was a bit of mutuality between her and Sly, especially towards the end of the game where she actually helps him take out Clockwork, and they even have the little date scene at the end when she's transporting Sly to the jail. Sly just had to double cross her, and Carmelita just basically ends the game with,
I'll find you, Cooper! I'll be seeing you soon, Ringtail.
Speaking of endings, I'm not really sure how to end this review, so here's my favorite line from Bentley.
You can't count on a friend to bust you out of jail. What kind of a friend are they?
Ah, yes. Don't we often forget that?